Hello, gentle marketers. Welcome to episode 61 of the Gentle Business Revolution podcast, the show where we talk about marketing your business by disrupting the current marketing paradigm and changing it to a gentler approach, one that's based on empathy and kindness. I'm Sarah Zinacroce, I'm the host here, and you know that you're in the right place if you are a heart-centered entrepreneur or change maker who is looking for a better way to market your business. Or you might also be a marketing impact pioneer, so someone who's working for an organization who does business for good. This episode falls under the P of people of the Gentle Marketing Mandala. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you're new here, you can download your one-page marketing plan with the gentle marketing version of the 7 Ps of marketing at sarahzinacroce.com/one page, the number 1 and page. The link is also in the description if you're listening to this on a mobile app. It comes with 7 email prompts to really help you reflect on these different Ps. But back to today's topic. This is a personal favorite of mine. It's all about holding space. So when doing the research about the Gentle Marketing Mandala, I came across the work of Heather Plett and found her Mandala course. She had an online course over, can't remember, maybe 14 or 21 days. And so from there, I kind of entered her world and felt so much aligned with everything she was doing, so that I then ended up signing up to her Holding Space program that went over 8 months. And Heather really made holding space her area of expertise, and boy, is she good at it. So now she has published her first book called The Art of Holding Space. And it gave me a chance to invite her onto the show. So in our conversation, we discussed some questions that came up for me when I was reflecting on holding space. So first, like a definition, what does holding space even mean? Can we hold space for the being and the doing in business? So obviously there is a whole kind of area of holding space for yourself. So that's kind of the inner work that everyone needs to do for themselves, or not do. Maybe it's funny how we always go back to doing, but it's work that needs to be done, but the doing is more about the being, right? So the inner work and the personal work. But for me, what intrigued me about this idea of holding space is this reflection. Well, is there a place, or is there a way that we can hold space for the being and the doing in business? And that's what I've been trying to do in our gentle business circle. So really get to know each other as people and our feelings and the being part. Because as entrepreneurs, I'm not going to go back to the dance between the being and the doing, but there's always, obviously, we bring our whole self to the equation, to business. And so I was really curious how this can be done, because usually holding space is more like, in this self-development kind of area. So being and doing, is that possible in business? Can we hold space for that? What are some concepts that new leaders need to be aware of when they're holding space? So how do we get leaders to pay attention to those things? We also talk about the role of the circle. Heather is following a concept that's called the circle way, and she'll explain that. And finally, we talk about the liminal space we find ourselves in right now and how to hold space for ourselves in this challenging time. So before we dive in, let me tell you a bit more about Heather. Heather Plett is the author of the book, The Art of Holding Space, A Practice of Love, Liberation, and Leadership. and the co-founder of the International Center for Holding Space. She is an international speaker, facilitator, writer, and lifelong learner whose work has been translated into a dozen languages and quoted in such notable publications as Harvard Business Review. She has trained people from 6 continents, both in person and online. Before launching her work in Holding Space, Heather worked in leadership and communications in government and nonprofit. She lives in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, with her 3 daughters. All right, so let's welcome Heather and really hold space for her. Hi, Heather. It's so good to speak to you today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Hi there. I'm really delighted to be here today.
Yeah. So I was just kind of telling you offline how our paths kind of crossed. And I just want to quickly retell the listeners as well. So when I came up with the Gentle Marketing Mandala, I was looking for information on mandalas, and I came across your mandala course. And so that's how I entered your world, and then created the Gentle Marketing Mandala. And from there, got your newsletters, and then attended your Holding Space program. And so here we are today talking about your new book that just came out, The Art of Holding Space.
Yes, thank you. So that's been a bit of a long journey because my mandala program preceded the Holding Space work by a few years. So
I know, yeah. And then from the mandalas, I also got much more interested in this idea of the path of the labyrinth. So that was kind of, the next step up from the mandala. Right. So it's just fun. So we'll get into your book in a second, but I just want to read this extract from one of your recent newsletters, which, by the way, I highly recommend my listeners subscribe to. I guess they can find that on your website.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's just your name.
I actually now have 2 websites. HeatherPlett.com is my personal writing website. And then we've just launched the Center for Holding Space. And that's at centerforholdingspace.com. And you can find lots of goodies there about holding space.
Okay. And so that email newsletter would also be there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Sign-ups on both of those websites.
All right. So let me read that extract from that email. And the subject line was, what if we show the mess? Mm-hmm. So it goes like this. What if we showed more of that messiness? What if we divested ourselves from the toxic value systems of capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy, and we stopped trying to perform to some ridiculous and unreachable standards of perfection? What if we let our bulges spill over our jeans, left our leaves on the lawn to make happy homes for the critters, left the dirty dishes in the sink, and when we're taking photos to share on Instagram, and let people know what it feels like the world is crushing us? Mm-hmm. What if we agree to no longer play by the rules that place value on curated lives? What if we invited people into our homes, even when we haven't dusted the furniture in weeks, and then didn't apologize? And here's my favorite part. What if we wrote letters to all of the marketers who tried to tell us our lives aren't good enough, and we told them we'll never buy anything from anyone who markets from that kind of manipulative scarcity mindset? That just really spoke to me. And so I had to read it here. It's so good. So yeah, on this show, we are all about being real and not being perfect, and show some of that messiness even on this podcast, right?
Oh, and I'm so delighted to hear about people that are working in, business development, marketing worlds that understand this at the core, that this is the way to build a society, and, to be marketing from a different perspective that sees us as whole and human and flawed and all of those juicy things.
Exactly. So let's get back to Holding Space and your book. So why don't you start by telling the listeners a bit more about how you define holding space?
Sure. So this is a concept that's been really growing for me. I I didn't come up with the term itself, but I was exposed to it through some of the facilitation practices that I've learned over the years, the Circle Way and the art of hosting, where we would talk about this concept of holding space. And it always felt like a bit of a, ephemeral concept that I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it was out there and I had a bit of a sense of it. And then it really landed for me when I was at my mom's deathbed, actually. In the 4 days my siblings and I gathered to be at her bedside as she was dying. And there was a palliative care nurse who was providing care for us, coming to the home to support us and to support mom in her dying days. And witnessing this nurse just gave me this incredible insight about what it means to hold space. And that's when I really defined it at that time. I gave it some definition and language, and I wrote a blog post about it. It was actually a couple of years after mom passed, but I wrote a blog post about it, defining it based on what that nurse had offered us. And I said, it's a willingness to walk alongside somebody when they're going through a really complex, I talk about liminal space, when they're in the liminal space, and we're willing to walk alongside without trying to control their process, without trying to direct the outcome, without trying to fix them, without layering our own ego and our own baggage onto what they're going through. And it's that willingness to be present and to do our own work so that we don't project onto them or do damage to them in trying to support them.
Yeah, you just mentioned this term that I think needs maybe some explaining. Maybe I've referenced to it before, but can you re-explain it? The term you used, the liminal space, like
Sure.
what is that?
Yes, liminal space is quite core to my work, because I tried to, when I first defined holding space, then I took a step back and I thought, okay, so what is the space that we're holding when we hold space for other people? And I didn't want, what I was witnessing at that time is a lot of people using the term holding space, a bit of a throwaway term. I'm holding space for you. That means I don't have to really do much for you. I can just say that and that's enough. And so I wanted to really go into the depths of what holding space is. And so I started looking for some ways of defining the space that we're holding, if we really are willing to hold space. And I came upon this term liminal space, and liminal it's actually a term that comes out of anthropology. And anthropology, they define the limen as the space in between. And it emerged out of witnessing in the anthropology these cultures where they had rituals marking the threshold of certain times of a person's life. For example, a coming of age for a young person, where they would have a ritual where, in some cultures, for example, they'll have in Australia, they talk about a walkabout, or in Indigenous cultures, they'll talk about a vision quest, where they send the youth out into the woods during that time. And what they're really reflecting on in this definition of limen is that there is a time in between what you once were, the youth that you once were, and what you are becoming, the adult that is emerging. And so I really took a look at what is this emptiness, this space in between that has no definition and no shape and form. And the metaphor that I use for it a lot is the metaphor of the caterpillar that's emerging into a butterfly. It has to go through transformation. It has to go through a surrender to the chrysalis, where it is unformed. And they say in a chrysalis, there's just a goo-like substance that is neither caterpillar nor butterfly. It's a nothingness. And so what I reflected on is that when we are holding space for each other, we have to hold space, create a container that holds them in that place of falling apart and deconstructing, so that some new story can emerge.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about the caterpillar. You also talk about something in your book that I think you call the authenticity spiral. Mm-hmm. How do is this the same kind of personal transformation, or how are they different?
There's a lot of similarity between those two, and I debated whether to just use one or the other. But the authenticity spiral, it's a little more reflective of what we go through in terms of when we're emerging into a more authentic life. And what I used as the visual metaphor for that is a labyrinth, where we take a journey into the labyrinth to discover something, find our true selves essentially, and then emerge back out of the labyrinth with a greater sense of who we are. So it's really reflecting on, especially, and most of us sometime in midlife, we discover that we're not really living authentically. And we very often, what's happening when we're not living authentically, it's because all of our childhood, all of our growing up needs, we gave up our right to live authentically so that we would have access to our primary needs of safety and belonging. So whether it's our parents who are disciplining us for misbehaving, or our teachers that are telling us the rules of the classroom, we're forever trying to figure out how to live in alignment with the culture and the family we're living in so that we are safe and we have a sense of belonging. But that can mean that we strip away parts of ourselves, of who we are and how we show up in the world, and find ourselves somewhere in the middle of our lives not sure who we are. We're maybe in careers that don't quite fit. We're maybe in relationships that don't serve the real needs that we have. And so we have to begin this journey. And this is where I've defined this spiral of authenticity, where we're going inward. We're taking a step over a threshold, essentially a liminal space, into this unknown space of discovering what's our real identity? How do I want to show up in the world? And I see that as a going inward so that you can then come back outward to live authentically and to live out your calling or purpose or vocation in whatever feels true for you.
Wow, I got goosebumps because it feels like you just described the gentle marketing book that I wrote this year during the lockdown. It's truly that journey, and I actually used the labyrinth also. And what you just described can be used for, the personal transformation, but I apply it to the authenticity that we feel in business as well, meaning that we can show up as, I say, I felt like I was wearing this mask all the time. I felt like I was, being someone that maybe was expected of me in the business world, and then, walking through the labyrinth and taking off that mask and finding your true self in order to bring that forward in marketing.
Yeah, I can so relate to that too, because I've built my own business over the last 9 years too. And early on in the business, I would read marketing books, and I would read, and they would all talk about how you had to present yourself and put yourself forward, and none of it felt authentic for me. And
Right.
It's funny, I had one friend who would call me out on it. Anytime she saw me write a blog post that didn't feel authentic, she was like, you're trying to do what the marketing experts are telling you, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of good to recognize that. It's like, oh yeah, that isn't the real authentic voice that I want to speak in. And so I'd have to reject that. And there were times when I thought, oh, this means I'm not going to make much money at this. But it was once I really leaned into that authenticity that people started paying attention. And that's when people heard my voice. And that's when, the blog post I talked about holding space with my mom dying, that's the one that went viral. And that came not out of a place of trying to market myself in the perfect way. It came out of a place of just sharing what's authentically in my heart. And that's what really launched my business in a real way, like pretty significant way.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You weren't trying to apply all these tricks and manipulations. How can I get the most views for this blog post, right?
No, I had no concept of that when I was writing it. It wasn't even in my mind at all. And so, yeah, you're right. Sometimes when we totally set those things aside, that's when the real beauty can shine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's at the same time, it's understandable that we want to, kind of do what we think or what other people tell us, oh, this is going to work. And so you're like, well, I guess if they found success, I have to try it as well. But
yeah,
it just always feels like it's not aligned with your values. And that's where this kind of rupture, I think, with your authentic self happens.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's where I keep equating it back to this our primal needs for safety and belonging. And you can put into those needs the need to pay the bills and feed our kids. And some of our safety is around, our business needs to succeed so that we have the income to pay the bills. So those are all really primal and really, core to our needs. And so we have to acknowledge those and allow those needs to feel heard in us, essentially, and not push them away because they are valid. But at the same time, if we only listen to those needs, then we'll make choices based on only those needs, and we'll deny ourselves our core authenticity.
So going back to holding space, I remember when I first attended your program, I felt quite intimidated by the fact that, or not intimidated, but I felt almost like ashamed that my story, there was no trauma in my life. There was no tragic event that brought me to the course. And it felt a bit like, that was very much what other people came with. And so I'm just, wondering, I was actually coming to the course because I wanted to see how we can bring holding space to, more groups and business and those kind of concepts. But clearly this concept can be used for a personal transformation and then also for a group transformation. So it can be, and I think your program is also set up that way, that first you learn how to hold space for yourself.
Right.
And then you learn to hold space for others, right?
Yeah. People are often surprised when they come to that module in the program, because we start out with a module just on defining holding space, understanding what it is and how to do it for other people. And then the second module is about holding space for yourself. And what's revealed in that module often surprises people. That's when often the most resistance shows up, or the most, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I had to peel away some of these layers of recognizing what are my own limitations, what are the barriers that are getting in the way of me holding space. We have a hard time being fully present for another person if we don't practice being fully present for ourselves. And so learning to name our own needs, learning to name even what you just did about expressing, what was coming up for you at the beginning of the program. Well, that was holding space for yourself and recognizing, oh, this is some of what I'm feeling here and when I'm present in this circle. And that's really valuable work to do wherever we are, whether we have traumas or not, or don't have traumas, to simply name where we're at, and then healing that and working through that and recognizing what are my barriers, what are the things that and when you're holding space in a group, for example, if you're hosting a workshop, it's kind of amazing what little things can trigger you into your own ego. And I'm often kind of surprised at, sometimes it's really, really minor things that just cause me to go spiral into this place of, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, or I'm not strong enough, or somebody doesn't agree with me, so therefore I must not be smart enough. And we have these really complex egos that trip us on so many different, ways, are little stones in our path. And so recognizing that and learning to still those voices and learning to get out of that ego, practicing really being present and mindful so that we have the capacity to be present for other people is really critical work for this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the ego, because I think that's where I got where I tripped up as well. And then trying to implement the idea of holding space in business masterminds, basically. And then, kind of catching myself wanting to, kind of cut people off from talking too long and let's go back to the schedule. And it's like this, this left brain thinking that always thinks, but we can't possibly talk so much about, just how this person feels. Let's, I have this agenda that I have to get through. It's really interesting.
Yeah, what you're talking about brings me back to a time when I was in leadership in the federal government. And we had gone through a really difficult, our leadership team, it was a regional leadership team so it was 3 provinces all flown together for a few days. And we were making really difficult decisions about how to cut our budget. And it was resulting in some of us having to cut some of our staff. And so I could feel this pain in the room that there was, people were having a hard time thinking about how am I going to go back home after these meetings and tell my staff that we're having to cut these positions. Some people are going to lose their jobs. And we were dealing with it on such a, head level. And at the end of the meeting, I turned to the director and I said, it doesn't feel right to leave this room without talking a little bit about how we're feeling about this. Like I could just, it felt like there was a bit of a trauma in the room at that moment. And one of the other managers turned towards me and he just said, feelings have nothing to do with management.
Whoa.
I was so shocked by that. And it really silenced me. And I didn't say anything more. And we left the meeting without talking about our feelings. But I stayed with that. I kept thinking about that. Like, was I wrong to want to create a space to hold space for the feelings of these managers? And I don't think I was. And I think that's where sometimes I've just finished reading a book on organizational trauma. And I think that's where we sometimes allow trauma to go underground in our organizations if we don't allow some of those conversations to happen in our business spaces where it is purely about our personal feelings, but it's going to affect the way we do our jobs and show up for each other. If we don't address those feelings, sometimes it will change the way we can show up in relationships with our coworkers and people we work with.
Yeah. So there seems to be this gap somehow with, the leaders that are in place now, but that maybe are missing some of these concepts and I don't know if you can call them skills, but definitely awareness to, hold space for meetings where there's place for feelings. So how are we kind of filling that gap? How are we moving on to a way to do business that allows space for that?
Yeah, I think it's a paradigm shift for a lot of people that have been trained in more traditional kinds of leadership training. And I was one of them at one time, had been trained in lots of really good leadership workshops, but none of them really taught me how to support my staff that were in crisis or how to hold space. It was a missing piece from any of the training I received. And I think back to one of my teachers, Margaret Wheatley, is a leadership writer and teacher. And she talks about how we need to move the paradigm of leadership from leadership as hero to leadership as host. And the hero is kind of the paradigm we're used to, but the leader's supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to know what they're doing. They're supposed to ride in on the white horse and save the day. And, and they're kind of infallible and they have to be strong and all of these things. But that's going to silence people, and it's going to cause people to lose their own sense of empowerment if they rely on the hero all the time. And so changing our paradigm where we begin to talk about leader as host, now the leader is like the host at a really good dinner party that's kind of paying attention to the room and kind of checking in. What do people need? How do I serve people so that they are at their best when they're in my workplace? And how do I keep them from how do I support them if they're going through trauma? What's the role of leadership in terms of that kind of witnessing and support? And I think that's really the missing piece. And I would love to see more leadership programs that incorporate some element of holding space in their training programs.
Yeah, I love that idea of host. Like that feels so much more welcoming as well, right? Than having and I talk about the conscious client even, until not so long ago, we always said the client is king. Mm-hmm. And even the client, in my opinion, doesn't want to be king anymore. They don't want to sit on a throne. They want to belong and be on the same level as the companies they buy from or the entrepreneurs they buy from. And so I think it's, you mentioned paradigm shift. I think it's for everybody that these values are changing and we want more inclusion rather than exclusion.
Yeah, I think that I love that language that you're using around conscious clients, and I think I think back to it's Peter Block who wrote books on community, and he talked about how we need a movement away from thinking about everybody as consumers to thinking about them as citizens, and I think that's a little related to what you're talking about the conscious client is.
Mm-hmm.
If we just see them as consumers, then we're just seeing them as a vehicle to make money from.
Right.
You're coming into my store, so I'm objectifying you as a client. But if I see you as a community member, as I see you as an important part of keeping our democracy going and keeping our culture going and keeping our community, then I begin to witness you differently, and I see your real needs. I don't just see you as a dollar sign walking through my door. And so, yeah, it is a paradigm shift to rethink how we are in relationship with each other.
Mm. A bit earlier, you mentioned something called the circle way. And I know that you use the concept of this a lot in your work. So just maybe shortly explain the circle way and just in general, what role does a circle play in the community? And, this idea, this example you explained about the business where really now we're moving to a leader in each chair. So what does the circle have to do with everything?
So the circle way was another one of those, speaking of paradigm shifts for me. I was working in government when I first came across this teaching, and I was working in an environment where there was real top-down leadership. There was a toxic leadership, and I was on the leadership team, and I was really trying to influence it, trying to help people be better communicators, help the leaders communicate better with their team members, but was really quite discouraged by what I was witnessing and the lack of capacity of the leadership. And I started looking for alternative leadership models and for some training that would help me to offer something into the workplace I was in at the time, and came across the teachings. First, it was Christina Baldwin and her partner, Anne Linnea, and they teach a concept called the Circle Way. And I ended up taking some training and have become a really connected to that community. It's really important part of my work. And the Circle Way is really shifting the paradigm. Like what they talk about, they have a book called The Circle Way, A Leader in Every Chair. And they talk about the old paradigm of leadership is really like a triangle shape with the archetype of the hero at the top of the triangle that's directing the people. And when you change from triangle to circle, now you begin to witness everybody's leadership in that space. You begin to witness what are we all contributing to the shared leadership, to the collaborative leadership of this work. And it doesn't deny the fact that some people have primary leadership, because we do talk about there being a host in the circle and a guardian in the circle. But it allows the wisdom of the collective to emerge. It allows we do things like passing a talking piece around, which really democratizes that space. When we pass a talking piece, everybody has equal voice. Everybody has an opportunity to speak from what's in their heart. And so I've really adopted this into my work, and I've just co-launched the Center for Holding Space. And the Circle Way is really it's the model that we use for how we are leading, how we're engaging with the people that work with us, etc. Because I think that's going back to what I said earlier about movement from hero to host. Incorporating the Circle Way is a way to help that movement happen.
Yeah. And I love this, just a picture, right? Instead of a triangle, to have a circle, it's just so much more harmonious. And I think we should just really apply that in workshops, in presentations. I think a lot of these conference type workshops are still kind of, in this old paradigm where the leader is at the front and then there's all these people sitting and just listening rather than having a real conversation.
Yeah, I think what we don't recognize when we stay with that paradigm, and to be honest with you, I don't go to many of those conferences anymore because I don't want to just be a learner in a chair. I want to be engaged in the conversation. And what we don't recognize when we stay with that model and we don't question that model is we give up our own power. We give it up to the person on the stage. We give up our own sovereignty, essentially, and we accept this kind of model as the only way things can happen. And I don't agree with that. I've been to large conferences that are modeled with the Circle Way, and we're always in the collective, and we're always in that co-learning space. And the one I used to attend every year called Authentic Leadership in Action. And we would have 500 people in a large circle, and it was multi-layered circles, but there was a consciousness around not placing the guru as the only person bringing wisdom into the room. And it was remarkable to change that paradigm and change how people showed up in it.
I love that. And I think I did see over this year, like I think pre-COVID and now, can't say post-COVID yet, but middle of COVID, people gotten used to having more conversations. Like I'm in a group where before it was just the guru talking and everybody else was just in the audience. And now everybody turns on their video and, there's more conversation than before. So I think things this year has really just allowed to, maybe change people's values and really understand, like, people want to contribute to the conversation and not just sit there and listen.
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes something like a pandemic serves as a bit of a wake-up call, and we gain a new consciousness about what do we really want as a culture, and how do we become culture makers? How do we become, how do we shape the culture that we want to live in? And that's when people become empowered. And that's what I love to see, is how do we empower the people that are used to just showing up and doing their job and forget that they have their own ideas. And even when I worked in government and nonprofit, I would try to really consciously lead in that way, that everybody had a voice, and we weren't just assuming that there was power only at the top, that power was a collective thing that we shared.
Mm. Yeah, because really, we talked about liminal space for individuals, but right now humanity finds itself in this liminal space, really, right? Mm-hmm. So how can we use what you talk about in your book to really evolve and return, hopefully, back to, I'm not just talking about, let's get rid of this virus, but back to a healthy relationship with our planet, with Mother Earth?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think that right now we have a unique opportunity to reimagine what is important to us. When we have to stay home with our families and connect with people only online or whatever it looks like, and stop flying so many places. And I travel quite a lot internationally, so I don't judge anyone for that. But when we are forced to kind of pause from that, then we can begin to think about what are our true values. Like, what do I miss the most? What I miss the most is connection and being in relationship and being with the people that I care about. And how do I put those values ahead of some of the consumer values or capitalism or, and so, yeah, I think as much as the disruption is hard to go through something like a pandemic, it's been incredibly hard and much harder for some people than for others. It's also, it's a time when we kind of are forced into that caterpillar or the chrysalis and that kind of messy, unknown space. And we do have the capacity to bring something new to being in this time.
Yeah, I really believe in that as well, and I think it's beyond our personal needs and wants. It's really also hopefully a time where people can find that connection again with Mother Earth and really see that we're at this crossroad where we can go either way, but I'm sure that my listeners know that it's now urgent that we do the work and go the right path, and also use our business for, sharing the good. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where I come back to what are our core values and what's at the heart of we really, since we just developed the Center for Holding Space, we really worked hard to identify what are the values that are going to help guide us in our decision making. And those aren't values around making the most money we possibly can. That's not what is at the core. Right. And you talk about protecting the earth. I think that's a really important value if that's that needs to be at the core, and protecting humanity, protecting the marginalized is one of my core values in our work. And so we strive to make decisions that will help us, be conscious of that in all of our decision making.
Yeah. Wow, this has been a wonderful, very inspiring conversation. I just want to mention your book again. It's called The Art of Holding Space. Do people just get it on Amazon or on your website?
They can. Amazon's been a bit challenging. For a long time, they said it wasn't, or they were on back order or something, and it's been a little bit slow, but you can get it on our website, centerforholdingspace.com. And then if you just click on the menu at the top of the book, it'll take you to a link. And so we ship it directly if people want. It can take a little longer depending where you live, but there's also some other options, other links on there of places you can order it.
Wonderful. Yeah. And
I know that in Europe, there's a website called bol.com, BOL.com. Some people have said they've gotten it through there. And so I know there's other sources internationally as well.
Okay. So just Google it and you'll find it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last question that I ask all my guests. What are you grateful for today, Heather?
I'm really grateful for the home that I have and for my 3 daughters that I live with. I kind of get an unexpected time with them. They're all kind of at the verge of leaving the nest, and this pandemic has sort of forced us back into the nest, which can be hard, but it can also be just sort of an unexpected gift to spend a really quality year with them before they all move away from home.
Nice. Wonderful. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with us.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure. And your upcoming buzz, is your book out already? It sounds like a really beautiful gift to the world. Thank you.
Yeah, it's coming out in February. I wanted to wait for the new energy, the new year, and new paradigm. So, yes.
Sounds great.
Thank you. I truly hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please check out Heather's websites at centerforholdingspace.com and heatherplett.com. You can look for her book, The Art of Holding Space, on Amazon or wherever you usually buy your books. Of course, we also have links to all of this at sarahsenecroce.com/GBR61. On Wednesday, I'm posting the last part of our chakra series, the throat, brow, and crown chakra. And yes, you need to be subscribed to the show as I'm not posting those on my site. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe in your favorite podcasting app. And then next Friday, it's time for another solo episode. I haven't done one in a while, and this time I want to talk about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and how they relate to our marketing. Also, I have a big favor to ask you. On December 1st, I'm launching my Kickstarter campaign for the Gentle Marketing Revolution book. I've mentioned it now many times, and by now you might be tired of it. But you know how these things are. They're kind of like, as a teenager, you're hosting a party and then you're just sitting there worrying that no one will show up. That's kind of how I feel in some moments. Other moments, I'm like, oh, no, I think this is going to be really fun and it doesn't matter how many people show up. But yeah, of course, I don't want to sit there by myself either. So if you would do me a big favor and come over to sarahsenecroce.com/Kickstarter and give me a like or a follow, that would be awesome. There's no need to buy anything. you just really make me feel supported. So yeah, that would really make my day. Thank you so much. I hope you'll join me on this journey to a kinder marketing paradigm. If you feel like sharing this episode with your friends, you can do that by either forwarding this episode or send them to thegentlebusinessrevolution.com. Let's be the change we want to see in the world. Talk to you soon.